I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. Today we're having a discussion on 5 years of the Kenyan Constitution. Just how far are we with implementing that, and are we better off 5 years later? We'll have a great analysis of that with people who we believe represent devolution. We have a senator, we have a county member of parliament, and we also have a commissioner from the CIC to have this great discussion on where we are, what are the milestones, what are the challenges, and what is the way forward for the next 5, 10, 15, even 20 years to come. Also, we will be focusing on the looming teachers' strike crisis tomorrow as the third term of the academic year begins. Whether teachers will be back in class or not is something we'll be looking at, as well as that discussion on the International Day of the Disappeared. That's all coming up on the Bulletin tonight. Here are the top stories.
But here comes Kipro.
History in the making. Teachers be in classrooms.
Tuwezi tukakubali chini ya vizingizio kwamba ni vita dhidi ya ugaidi wananchi wa Kenya waanze kumalizwa moja kwa moja.
Waliokufa wakauawa na wameonekana hao ndio wako katika extrajudicial killings.
And where are they? Government on the spot over disappeared persons. Our sign language interpreter is Maresha Owiti, and we start off this Sunday night bulletin with some fantastic news. A final day gold medal from Asbel Kiprop ensured Kenya finished top of the medal standings at the just concluded World Athletics Championships in Beijing, China. Kenya scooped a total of 7 gold medals, 6 silvers and 3 bronze medals to condemn sprinting powerhouses Jamaica and the United States to 2nd and 3rd respectively. Now this is the first time in the history of the tournament, the championships, that Kenya has topped the medal standings in that event. Lynn Washira begins our coverage tonight on this winning note. Top of the world we are indeed tonight. Let's come back to the country now. A teacher strike is looming with just over 24 hours to the deadline by teachers to the government to effect their 50 to 60% pay hike awarded by the courts. Teachers' unions, the Kenya National Union of Teachers and the Kenya Union of Post-Primary Education Teachers, insist that teachers will not report back to work for the third at their workstations tomorrow morning. Rita Tinina reports.
When the highest court in the land upheld the Industrial and Labour Relations Court ruling awarding teachers a 50 to 60% pay rise, teachers had every reason to celebrate. It was perhaps the closest they have ever been to better pay in their decades-long remuneration battle.
Walimu hawatafungua shule mwezi wa Septemba, na tutaenda mikutano aina hii tena. Ile walimu wanataka sasa ni pesa, pesa, pesa.
Public schools are scheduled to reopen for the third term on Monday the 31st of August, just a day before the threatened teachers' strike. But now, the teachers' employer, the Teachers Service Commission, says it has not received any strike notice from NAT or KUPPET. In a statement, the TSC says all teachers are expected at their respective workstations from Monday the 31st of August, performing their teaching and administrative duties. The TSC says the third term, set by the Cabinet Secretary for Education, will run from the 31st of August to the 12th of November. There has been no change in the term dates and is asking parents to send their children to school and all teachers to adhere to the term dates given by the Cabinet Secretary for Education. Last week, the National Assembly's Budget Committee was considering the option of introducing a supplementary budget before the House in order to compel Treasury to release more funds to the teachers' employer. And on this, teachers appear to be getting support from all quarters.
Let us show serious commitment when we deal with our teachers. This is the lifeline of everybody. This is the life of you and me and our children.
And I am among the members of parliament who are saying, pay teachers. If they have gone to court, won a case, pay them. Let teachers get their money. If it were not for teachers, all of us would not be here. Let's settle teachers.
Teachers' unions say they will institute contempt of court proceedings against the TSC if it fails to honor the court orders. The government is still grappling over where and how to get at least 17 billion shillings to effect the teachers' pay rise. With the teachers adamant that they will not report back to work for the third term unless their pay hike is effected in full, with the government running out of options on how to get the money, and with the TSC warning teachers to comply with the term dates, the stage is set for another face-off between teachers and the government as yet another strike, the second this year, looms.
Government could be having underhand dealings in inciting county health workers to rebel against county governments. Chairman of the Council of Governors, Peter Munya, suspects the national government could be behind a series of health workers' strikes in several counties with the intention of reverting health services back to it. Munya says governors are ready to take on the national government to make sure the health sector is improved countrywide.
I want, to advise the health sector unions and the workers to accept the reality of the devolved system of government, that they are no longer working for the national government, and therefore their issues can only be handled at the county level. I also want to advise Macharia to confine himself to his mandate at the national level. He need not waste a lot of his time traveling to the counties, trying to instigate strike. Not going to help him.
Human rights activists are petitioning the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Counter-Terrorism to investigate the Kenyan government over mysterious disappearances of persons in the hands of law enforcers. The activists in a section of political leaders held a march to day for the disappeared and are accusing the government of condoning extrajudicial killings.
His family has not heard of his whereabouts either and still hold dearly to this footage captured by the CCTV cameras from their shop, showing the very last time he was seen. Attempts to get police to be futile, and even since they sought the help of KTN to air their plight, no one has come forward with any information on the same. And it is such cases that brought together human rights activists, politicians and the many other families whose kin are either missing or are found murdered under mysterious circumstances. Together, they marked the International Day for the Disappeared, and it was here at the Nairobi's Freedom Corner that the conversations began.
Swala hili sio swala la Waislamu peke yake. Swala hili ni la Wakenya wote. Hatuwezi tukakubali chini ya vizingizio kwamba ni vita dhidi ya ugaidi, wananchi wa Kenya waanze kumalizwa moja kwa moja, familia kuachwa yatima,
ambao wamedhulumiwa, wamepoteza maisha, na tukao na evidence kwamba hao watu wamekufa wakazikwa na tunajua mahala wamezikwa.
But that was not just it. They further held a march to mark the day with placards bearing the messages condemning the disappearances. But it was their arrival at a Nairobi hotel that the bone of contention emerged. The Kenyan government came under sharp criticism over its alleged strategy to countering terrorism in the country, that is, the extrajudicial killings and instilling of fear to its people. Even further, it emerged that the strategy is characterized by singling out and profiling specific communities in the country.
We will petition the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Counter-Terrorism and Human Rights to investigate Kenya and the Anti-Terrorism Police Unit, whose activities are the Kenya Defense Forces, and the Anti-Terrorism Police Unit, whose activities are not clear and in keeping with the radical human rights constitution.
We must continue with the struggle, because what is happening, the objective of these enforced disappearances is some form of social cleansing or political cleansing.
For you to get the unconditional support of the West is for you to say Islamic terrorists. Shout loud. If it doesn't exist, create it. I'm not saying that it does not exist, it does exist. But the manner it's being done around, it looks like there's a process to create it so that you can carry favors with the West.
I mean, for hundreds of years we have had those madrasas in this country, doing exactly the same thing. They have been graduating students. Those students have been memorizing Quran. Madrasas have been there. Mosques have been there. The Quran is the same one. Why didn't we have terrorism all those years? I mean, it's not the institutions, it's not the religion, it's the people, it's the individuals. So why don't we look for individuals who are involved in these things?
If it is not the state, isn't the state worried that there is a breakdown of law and order? What are they doing about it? It has happened once too many for us to think it is not the state. The only conclusion is that it is the state and it is people they have sent, and if not, they are encouraging the situation.
The International Day of the Disappeared, marked on the 30th of August, is a day created to draw attention to the fate of individuals imprisoned at places and under poor conditions unknown to their relatives and without legal representation.
As to whether extrajudicial killings exist in the country or not is still a mystery, as most of the time the cases linked to it either have little or no evidence at all. The government has through time denied these allegations. In the meantime, human rights activists say they do have indeed enough evidence to show that it exists. Meanwhile, those suffering are the families of those people who've disappeared, and their only hope seems to be the judicial system. Ian Wafula, KTN News, Nairobi.
And we're joined by Alamin Kimathi, who's a human rights activist and whom you've seen in that clip and that story by Ian Wafula. Thanks for joining us tonight. Do we have any rough estimates as to how many people are missing?
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you for some elaborate coverage of our day. As to figures, we are talking very conservatively, and because it's work in progress of collating the whole data, we will soon be releasing the entire the figures. But we've been working, in July we were working with 186. That would, for us, qualify to the actual definition of either extrajudicial killings, and because it has a very small demarcation, you know, or enforced disappearances. Extrajudicial killings in the sense that we have bodies, we can see the bodies, we can identify these bodies, and there is prima facie evidence to say that these were shot or killed, or, you know, in those kind of circumstances. Enforced disappearances in that these people are known to have been, you know, taken out of, you know, either by the state agencies, where we can see clearly this is the evidence of the state, or people looking like the state, or that they are suspected because of a series of circumstances or whatever, circumstantial evidence or something, that these were taken out by state authorities. And they are still missing, or they are believed to be disappeared.
Okay, all right. Or perhaps dead until dead. Yes, until that is, of course.
Yes, we have people who even disappeared. We believe disappeared, walked into the Savo forest, or forced to walk and disappear. A blind man, Mohammed Bekit.
That's what happened. Let's talk about the response from the government. How many representatives from the government did you have? I believe Senator Bill Okero was the only one from the Jubilee side of the coalition. But when you think about it, what's the sort of response you're getting from the state when you go to them and say these people are missing, and we believe in some cases it's at the hands of the state?
Well, Yvonne, is a very, very interesting scenario here. In private, and in quite some discussions with well-placed state authorities, including in the security agencies across the board, there's admission that this thing is happening and we don't like it. And there's, you know, evidence of frustration in their faces.
Frustration, do they say what they're going to do about it? Because they can be frustrated, but is there any recourse?
No, they don't, but there are some, really, who even are reaching out to us and asking us, can you please get involved and help us come out of this? And then, on the converse of it, there are others who clearly say that we've done this before, it worked, we mopped out Mungiki the hard way, and it worked. But we always give them a rider that Mungiki never worked. What you did, you quelled the organized Mungiki that you would identify where they were in the slums and wherever, but they morphed. And now they're the criminal gangs who are operating and shooting everybody in Lavington, in the high-end areas. So what have they done? You push them out there, and if you do that, the counter-terrorism thing, the way you are doing it, I mean, and there is evidence of it already happening, that these guys are going underground and doing their thing underground, where you cannot even know when they will hit. And small one, Masjid Musa. The fellows who used to be in Masjid Musa. Ask yourself, where are they? We would identify and say, they're here, they pray here, they do whatever here, we could see them.
So you're saying that this exercise now takes them underground, where it's harder to detect their activities?
All
right.
Or they go into other activity that was not essentially what they were in before.
Okay, all right. I'd like us to listen to a clip. I spoke to the Principal Secretary of Interior, Monica Juma, about 2 months ago, on July the 26th, on this specific issue. At that time, President Obama was in the country. Let's listen to what she had to say on this specific issue.
This is not about extrajudicial, this extrajudicial that. Actually, as a matter of fact, since January, we've not had any such case. But I think we've had repeated stories that keep being repeated without any fact. What we have seen is that police officers, security officers have been targeted repeatedly. And so what the issue here, and what President Obama was saying in that discussion, which was quite interactive, I have to say, was how do we improve Kenya and America, in fact, because this is not just a Kenyan problem, it's not a regional problem, it's a global problem. And this discussion is going on across the globe. How do we improve our capacity to include everybody in a way that they can contribute to securing their nation and their spaces, as communities, as regions, as countries, and as the world?
Your response to that?
You know, Monica Juma is a conundrum in this issue, knowing where she came from and what kind of predisposition she has, intellectual capacity to grasp things and even present them. She's gone round. And what she presents here is really, really, really sad that that can come out of her. Yesterday, the media is reporting that her boss, Major General Kaiseri, retired, or rather, Lieutenant General Kaiseri, retired, is admitting already that there have been indeed extrajudicial killings. How many months down the line? A few months, I believe. And what he's essentially saying is confirming everything that we've said throughout, and what we said even at the time that Monica Juma was referring to in that clip there. And those hard tactics, what he calls that, I mean, he says that it's going to be, she says that it was going to be, the damn thing, is probably what has resulted into the attacks that we've seen, probably, most probably. Because I'll tell you this, when you clear out even families of suspects, even people who are just essentially collateral damage, what they call collateral damage, and you shoot a suspect in front of the mother, shoot him dead. The language I hear, and I keep hearing repeatedly, is mothers telling their children, hey, I don't want to see you being killed anymore in front of my eyes. Just get out there and please, don't come dead. So what is that?
Okay. I'd like us to talk, as we conclude our discussion now, on the way forward. What else are you going to do? We've seen this march today, the International Day of the Disappeared, which is the first time we're actually marking it here in Kenya, even though it's been marked internationally over the last couple of years. But what next? There's a march today. You had a meeting later at a hotel in the city. So where does this go to next? And the effect of these disappearances on the war on terror?
Even our disappearances agenda, we are not really talking just about the war on terror and extrajudicial killings in counter-terrorism and whatever. We talked all the way. The history of this country is replete with extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. And therefore, when we're talking about that, we're actually saying time has come for us as a nation to have a conversation around these issues. So therefore, the first thing that we want to do is to ensure that we get a dialogue in this country to look at where are we with this issue and where do we go with it. Some of us have ideas about where do we intend to take this nation with this in this conversation. But on the other hand, there are some tangible outcomes that we really expect out of here. We have even said that we have a massive data that we need now to present to authorities. Authorities in this country to move them, the ones that need to move. I'm aware that the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has been on this doing a lot of investigations, but in a very, very limited
so what you're
way.
saying is collating the data?
Collating the data, placing it at the doorsteps of organs of state institutions that are mandated with action, and they need to do some action. But we are not leaving it there, as you said, even in the bulletin. We are moving the working party of the United Nations on enforced disappearances with data, with farm data already that's been collected and it's gone out, to come into this country and investigate. Just the way we did with Philip Alston, Professor Philip Alston on the Mungiki and PEV killings. This is what we are already doing. And on the other hand, we're also moving the United Nations Special Rapporteur on counterterrorism to do the investigation. We have a lot of data, including, and I don't want to blow my trumpet, I have myself conducted very, very heavy research. The Horn of Terror is a publication that is out of there. The renditions, we still have enforced disappearances coming out of the 2007 renditions to Somalia, Ethiopia. And we have renditions even as late as the ones that I was involved in, where I was a victim myself for 1 year. And we will present all that data. But then all along, the thread is just a weave of it that we need to ensure that we unfurl where it's supposed to be, and the United Nations is part of it, and this country also need to come to terms with it. And it's a political question that we'll be dealing with up to and beyond the 2017 general elections when it comes. We have to have that conversation and hold government to account, including the current government and the previous governments. Meaning even the government of Mwai Kibaki needs to be brought to account. We are not here in a hate kind of thing. We are here to have a conversation that brings us to, settle this issue, at least for this nation to move. Okay, all right. That's a good place to leave it at. And we'll continue to follow the work that you're doing with this issue of enforced disappearances in the country. Alamin Kimathi, human rights activist, thank you very much for your time this evening. And like we said, we'll continue to follow up on that story. Let's take you to South Sudan for a moment now. A few days after the signing of a ceasefire agreement by the warring sides in South Sudan, differences have started emerging between the government and rebel forces loyal to Riek Machar. The South Sudan's ruling party SPLM spokesperson Colonel Philip Aguer told reporters in Juba that rebels have not heeded to the cessation of hostilities and are continuing to engage in fights in the far-flung provinces. The colonel warned that the Sudanese People Liberation Army SPLA will not sit back while rebels continue to torture and kill civilians.
The people of South Sudan celebrate the signing of the Compromise Peace Agreement by the President of the Republic and the Commander-in-Chief of the SPLA last Wednesday. Rebels of Riek Machar attacked Malakal town yesterday at 5 p.m. and continued to shell Malakal, and again repeated the attack on the town at 10 p.m. at night.
All right, so we want to take a short break right now on KTN Weekend Prime. Checkpoint is up next and already getting quite a bit of feedback from you regarding the Constitution. We're asking where we are 5 years on, and will a referendum help solve some of the challenges in implementing that law? We'll see you after the break. 5 years after promulgation of the Constitution, is Kenya embracing the new dispensation? Raising and flagging certain issues you feel have not been handled well in the implementation of the law?
to understand the implementation of the Constitution, you have to split the period into two to understand it, so that then you measure whether the speed before the election and the speed after the election is the same. My view is that the speed is not the same. We were working very well before the general elections. We have slowed down. We have not protected the gains, and therefore slowly you begin to think that we are slow puncturing the implementation of the Constitution, because Commissioner Waiganjo, my learned friend and senior, term is about to come to an end. He was in this before all of us. He was in this before Jubilee government. He was in it before everybody. So and he's about his term is about to come to an end. There's a member of parliament who has said that we are not going to renew their term. But the fundamental question that you must ask is, where were we supposed to be in 2015, and what have we done? The fact of the matter is that the fundamental reforms, and I mean fundamental reforms, that Kenyans wanted implemented in 5 years have not been implemented. We have institutions, as Commissioner Waiganjo says, but think about it. Where is the institution that deals with corruption? Where is the institution that is going to deal with injustices, historical? Where is it? Where is the institution that is supposed to deal with public land, called the National Land Commission? Is it working as the way we anticipated? It is not working. The institution of audit, for example, and I'm glad my senior and learned friend is here, because you know, we contemplated in the war against corruption and transparency and accountability, we would have an Auditor General whose office would be independent. The National Assembly has passed the memorandum signed by His Excellency the President. I can say this now here and repeat it again, that the clauses that they have passed are going to remove the gains of accountability. So I've said that we have slow punctured the progress. And sometimes when I was driving here, I was thinking that maybe we made a mistake. Maybe the executive made a mistake in terms of the institutions. Was it wise not to have a Ministry of Justice, so that you have a person who we can possibly put questions on? Because if you look at the term and mandate of CIC, you begin to wonder. For example, when we were dealing with the extension of the deadline, whose problem was it? Because the Constitution contemplates that the work will be done by CIC, Attorney General, Kenya Law Reform Commission, and the Executive. So we actually do not know, when we passed the extension at the National Assembly, where the problem is. So you begin to... So
you're saying we didn't flag the issue, and therefore it could happen again?
It's going to happen again. But what is more, for me, what is worse is this, that we are actually 24 months to the next general election.
Right.
At this point, before the last general elections, we were preparing for elections. Instead of thinking about the things we are going to do in the next 12 months, we should be thinking, are we ready for a general election? That is the question. Are we still ready to conduct
stinging indictment on the Jubilee administration, if you like. It says the pace before the general election, very different, seems to be a slow puncture after. What's your response to that?
Thank you, Yvonne. And I believe that the Jubilee, the new constitution, when all of us were elected into parliament, we came in as a new bodies. The presidency, the executive, that is, the legislature, except the judiciary. So looking at things that have been moved progressively so far, I can say with beyond reasonable doubt that you've done quite well. And if there have been delays here and there, it cannot be blamed on any one person. Not the National Assembly, not the Senate, not even the executive. But I believe that what has remained now cannot mean that we are not ready for the election in 2017. Whichever time it happens, we are saying that by that time everything will have been put in place. And because I find most of the institutions that are supposed to be put in place have been put in place. Most of the laws have already been passed. Really, Parliament has done a lot. But I know that even those which are remaining, because we cannot extend any more beyond the 1 year that we've extended. So we must work within the time limits that we have and ensure that everything progresses well.
Okay, Florence, because you mentioned the National Assembly and you believe they've done their work, but Kenyans today sit and say, well, how many extension after extension for passing these bills? It took the Speaker banning foreign travel for members of parliament to say, you know what, let's sit here and let's try to pass these bills within the stipulated time. And like the senator says, we have about 24 months to the next general election. And so some think that we might start muddling up the issues of passing the constitutional bills with campaign matters. What's your take on that in terms of the role of the National Assembly in implementing the constitution?
You know, to be able to understand the National Assembly, most of the work does not happen within the chamber. The work of the National Assembly happens within the committees. If you go to the committees, you'll find that a lot of work is being done, and what the committees do is just report to the House. The House then will be able to move and pass the legislation, depending on the amendments that they intend to make. So really, I wouldn't say that even foreign travel would be an issue of concern in as far as the passage of bills is concerned. What we need to do is to work together with the institutions that are also are supposed to ensure that legislation has been brought to the National Assembly. You understand that as Senator Mutula has said, we are supposed to, the Attorney General and the CIC, and my learned friend and senior is present, they are supposed to ensure that legislation is transmitted into Parliament, and then Parliament will be able to pass the law. So I think that is what should happen, and I know that CIC is supposed to, its term is supposed to lapse in December. They are yet to come before Parliament. I know that there is a retreat pending between them and the Committee of Parliament, CIOC. I believe there is a way in which we are going to work. And my senior has just mentioned to me that all the bills that have not been passed as at now have already been transmitted to the Attorney General, which means as Parliament resumes, the National Assembly resumes in September, then we are going to ensure that work is moved fast. And it will be done, Yvonne.
All right, Kamodo, let's talk about some of the challenges, because we've highlighted, you know, what's worked and what we've done. And the legislature has also not been an august house, particularly this parliament. We've seen what's even been happening in the committees that Florence mentioned. Allegations of graft within parliament. Some say parliament, you know, getting higher powers. We talk about what's happening within the counties in the health sector at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of things that are, some things that are not working. Let's talk about the challenges for a moment and your proposals towards just working those out.
Yeah, I think the reality, Yvonne, is that the changeover from where we were coming from to where we're going, I think shocked many institutions. And I think the result of that, particularly for the executive, was a delay in terms of facilitating particular legislation. In fact, and that's why I said sometimes we hit Parliament too hard. In regard to the question of the bills, the problem of delay is actually not Parliament. It is actually the executive. And part of it is that the bills that are remaining were the very complex ones. These are the ones that were left to the end. I think it was only right that Parliament extends the time. I think what one worries about Parliament is that it will take they will give the necessary attention to these laws so that we do not again sometimes claw back on some of the constitutional protections through legislation, because that has happened in the past, and that has been a major weakness, and I think we need to look out for that. I think the other place, one that we made a mistake, is that I think one of the most critical software issues of the Constitution was the leadership and integrity issues. The minute we backpedaled on the need to place a high threshold, both in terms of entering to Parliament, because the Constitution actually says that you will have educational and ethical requirements before you get into the House. The minute we removed that, and that was done by the House. That was done by the House. That's number one. Number two, we then watered down the enforcement mechanism, which means even if you breach Chapter 6, you can get away with it, because unless you go to court, go and get an order. So the minute we went wrong there, then it means that we poisoned and contaminated the various areas of representation. So we made a mistake there. I think the reality is that even with that sometimes the House, one would have expected sometimes better leadership The reality is, because some of the things, some of the excesses that have happened in the House are actually a failure sometimes of leadership. And one hopes that the sort of things we have seen, where we had fights in the House, we have had fights in, I believe, in Honorable Mutula's constituency, where MCAs are fighting in the fields and with Wananchi watching.
With a county
that does not help send the message that you are a new country.
Right.
And so that the lack of that software has not been good. If you look at the issues of health and the other challenges that the countries are having, they have many of them have to do with the challenges of transition and the fact that many people have not come to terms with the fact that we actually are a devolved system of government. And so when you hear people saying like we are going to devolve health back to the national government, it discloses a fundamental misunderstanding of why we went to constitutional reform. It is because the central system was not working. So even if there's a problem with the county system now, the solution cannot be to go back.
So it's to fix it.
It is to fix it.
Within the All right, that's a good place to talk about some of those challenges, because Mutula, you've been talking about these challenges. In fact, there's the Okoa Kenya referendum that is in the works, and you know, we've been talking about that for a year. Senator, where are we with that?
You know, I don't like the way you're just looking at me.
He has not asked for my signature.
No, he hasn't.
No,
and we hear that, you know, a million signatures are being verified. You postponed the relaunch of that, you know, when we had the media blackout, and then Garissa happened, and another postponement. And some are saying you're also time barred with that, because that could end up in the campaign phase, and that would be a little tricky. So maybe you could use this opportunity to update us on where you are with Okoa Kenya.
From what I know, because the Secretariat, I believe, is working on the signatures to be forwarded. But you must remember that there's also pesa mashinani which is being done by the governors, and therefore there was need to ensure that these processes are moving together in a way that would not put this country into either 2 or 3 processes. You're also aware that the Senate has a committee which I sit as a vice chairman, which is also looking at some of these clauses in the Constitution that are giving us a lot of problems. And you've mentioned challenges, and I want to point out just one challenge at the beginning. The term of my senior at the end says that either their term will lapse after 5 years, or as Parliament will decide or determine, but yet the extension goes to the National Assembly. There's small little things that are in the Constitution where you have Parliament mentioned in one sentence, but where there's a comma they put the National Assembly, then excluding the Senate. Those are some of the challenges. You've mentioned counties, and I can tell you, by the way, I don't think it's a software problem. This, I think, is just bad manners. What is happening at county is absolute bad manners.
And your county is one of those.
My county,
possibly of the county.
It's even worse, because after going through a dissolution process, the county government and assembly have agreed to work together before even the report comes to the Senate. These problems are going to be there, but I've said that the challenges we have at counties are extreme bad manners that, you know, we have referred them to the Senate as devolution of corruption and bad manners, because those sort of things is not what people contemplated, where people become small gods, small kings, everything, you know. Now you know, in Machakos there's somebody who wants to become a king. The point
you just had to bring in politics.
The point I want to make is that although we have those challenges that my senior mentioned, and you read his article today, there are people out there who have seen a little of the benefits of devolution. This is one of those things, and I'm afraid we will never be able to reverse. Anybody who is going to attempt to reverse devolution as it is, plus the structures, even the ones we imagine one day you wake up and scrap the Senate, are going to have a rude shock, because it's not going to happen. And even when you look at the problems we have at health, it's not a software problem. Kamodo Eganjo is being very nice. This is a problem at the central government. The Constitution is very clear at Article 225, where funds are supposed to be devolved. You're not supposed to wait for a single 1 hour or a day. The fact of the matter is that, and I'm hoping that CIC can say this loudly more than I can, that we cannot devolve the health function. And everybody says we have devolved 93%, but all the funds are still held at the ministry. And you've seen the statement by the chair of the Council of Governors. The fact is that we have devolved the health function on paper only. The funds are all at the national level.
Okay.
And therefore, what the crisis you're seeing in counties is a man-made crisis. And we must say it, that the people sitting at Treasury, sooner rather than later, are going to start smelling the coffee, because you cannot revert the function of health to national government. Because as Kamodo Aganjo again says in his article, if they have not done well in education, what makes you think they are going to do well with health?
All right, okay. Interesting, because a lot of indictment to the executive. Roland Otieno Olo says, the executive didn't support the new constitution and is now trying to frustrate it. Talking about the support that's not being received from the executive. Florence, what are your thoughts on that? And of course, this then tends to become political, because you know what the implied message is here about who didn't vote for the constitution, who voted yes, who voted no. And undoubtedly, some of these things coming up even 5 years after, now that we're all ruled by the same constitution. But talk to us about the role of the executive and whether you think they are not playing ball with this issue.
First of all, before I get to your question, Yvonne, if you allow me, when my learned friend and senator speaks about bad manners on the county level, I think they ought to have offered leadership in Makueni, because that is the senator of Makueni. But you've seen of all the counties, Makueni has had the worst of problems, and their problems have not been settled by the senators we speak. I don't know what the senators done.
We were injuncted.
So what we are saying is that whether they are bad manners or not, whether there is a leadership problem, maybe we ought to have seen that leadership coming from Makueni first.
So you're
before
saying
we talk about
the senators didn't play their oversight role for
I'm
the county?
talking about the senator of Makueni.
Okay.
He ought to have done better. Just to come back to your question, Yvonne, you'll find that the president, our president Uhuru Kenyatta, supported this constitution very much. With his resources, with everything that it required. And what I know about the Jubilee government, when it came to power, one of the things the president undertook to do when he had addressed Parliament was to ensure that he implements this constitution to the letter, in spirit and in the letter. And I want to say that, I can say for now, that the president and the deputy president have done extremely well. If there is anyone who feels that the executive has not been supporting the implementation of this constitution, then they're not looking at the various factors at play. We have devolution that has 47 governors who also feel in their own way that they have governments. Then we have the executive.
But they're also pushing for a referendum, the governors.
Not anyone person can be blamed for this. And I want to say that because we also have an intergovernmental relations committee, where if there are any issues that governors feel they are not able to do and the executive is becoming an encumbrance, they would raise them up. When we talk about health, you cannot say monies or funds are being held by the national government. The Senate is the one that is supposed to ensure that monies come down to the counties, because they also do appropriation. I have not heard one senator complaining today that there is money that is being held by the central government, and that is why the county health nurses and everybody is going on strike. I have not heard them summon anyone before them so that they are able to understand why the health problems, if it's the national government to blame. What I can say is that national government has given out all the funds that are supposed to be released to the counties. What the counties are supposed to do is streamline their structures to ensure that they pay the salaries as they are supposed to do. And lastly, let me say that the Jubilee government has done its best. So all of us are supposed to play a part to ensure that this work is done, not to blame the national government or blame anybody.
All right,
and of course, you know, the Okoa Kenya has not done much. We've been waiting for it. It has not come. They cannot say Pesa Mashinani has withheld them. They can continue with their agenda. If they have their agenda for Okoa Kenya, if there is any Pesa Mashinani, let it come as well. Why would they be worried about Pesa Mashinani?
No. I want to say this because my good friend is wrong, and is wrong on many counts. In the case of Makueni, the Senate was issued with an injunction, which is subsisting to date. And I remember Kamodo Waiganjo making a comment about this and said, Senate must respect the court order. And that's what exactly we did. We would have gone ahead and said, no, we want to go there. Because when these issues arose, the devolution committee led by Senator Murkomen was on its way to Makueni before even the dissolution started and before Governor Kibwana's impeachment motion was filed at the county assembly. But an injunction was issued. So that is the point. But I also want to correct an impression created that the Senate does appropriation. You need to read the law, my learned friend. It's not there. We do not appropriate. The appropriation is done at the National Assembly Committee led by Reverend Mutava Musimi. The appropriation done for this financial year that is going to counties in the function of health is 3.6 billion. Do you know why we ended up with a quarrel with the National Assembly? It's because they had reduced the figure to 2.4 billion. We proposed they increase it to 3.6, and that is the reason we had a stalemate. Because we suggested that they increase the allocation to level 5 hospitals. But otherwise, all the funds, including the medical equipment that was purchased by national government as a conditional grant, was done through the National Assembly. It is clear. We had no role to play in it because the Constitution and the structure of the Constitution, the wisdom of the drafters thought that the Senate should not involve itself in appropriation, means that we deduct money from the national kitty. But let me tell you, the national government kitty has more funds this year than it had last year. So if we are working towards devolution and ministries are supposed to have reduced their functions, we're supposed to see a steady rise of the money that is going to counties, not a steady rise in the money that is being allocated to national functions, including irrigation, water, NYS, devolution, and all those things. That money that they are giving is supposed to go to counties. And that is why counties, the county of Nyeri is spending 83%. Almost its entire allocation on emoluments. The reason is that, and Kamodo Waiganjo can confirm, that some of the counties where there are provincial headquarters inherited staff.
Right.
Are they supposed to fire them? And devolution, one of the things that devolution was supposed to do is create employment.
Yvonne, I think the sad thing, and this is part of the problem we have also as a nation. You see, the reality is, between this good friend of mine from the National Assembly and my very good friend from the Senate, the question of allocation of money to the county governments, it's actually determined in their houses. So, and the reality is the Senate is involved. The Senate actually, with the National Assembly, agrees on the amount of money to go to counties. And they actually have they agree together on the division of revenue. But the Supreme Court gave you that power. And that is how you ended up disagreeing and coming into a compromise on a number. So you agree together. But so in a sense, once you have agreed, I think you need to own that decision. And then we move forward. I think that the conflict, you see, the problem is when we give Kenyans continually the impression that the problem is actually with this other house, we refuse to take responsibility. The truth of the matter is that between the National Assembly and the Senate, there is a problem. I agree with you, Senator. There are certain monies that currently are held by the national government because they are being involved in institutions that actually by now should have been dissolved, particularly some of the parastatals, which we are still appropriating money to, and yet they carry out functions of the national for the county government. But also the reality is you also couldn't just dissolve them immediately. There is a transition process. These people have staff, they have officers, they have contracts, so it was impossible. The question we should be asking is, having made the mistakes we have made, going forward, other than blaming each other, what it is that we can do so that we cure the problem? Because the county governments are not about governors. The county governments are not MCAs. They are about services for our people. The national government has no population other than the one in the counties. So if we don't find a solution together, and I believe the solution can be found in terms of how do we ensure we are not spending too much money on a bloated wage bill in the parastatals, that we are not spending too much on institutions that should be in the counties. That is a joint problem of the National Assembly and the Senate. It is not a problem of the governors, it is not a problem of the county assemblies. And I think that needs to be our focus to ensure we don't have a problem. We have a second problem, release of money. The reality is, again, we have a dual problem. Then the Treasury is delaying release of money. But you also can understand the Treasury. If you're holding 31 billion shillings in the central bank, and you have an exchequer problem, it means if you're going to release more money to the counties, you have to go and borrow the money. That borrowing creates inflation. So the question is, what do you do? Should that 31 billion shillings continue to be held in the central bank while you borrow in the market? That is a real problem. And the solution is not to say just continue releasing the money, but to say what solution do we provide? For example, I can give you one possible solution. Should we amend the law so that this money is available generally to all counties? Yeah, so that you have a drawing right. You have a drawing right to the money, rather than money being allocated to you. Are not using it, but it can't be given to anyone else. These are solutions we need to find together, and this can be done by basic amendments in the law. So what I'm saying is, I think the time for blaming one another, we must move from there and now provide solutions.
We have in fact we have done that in a committee that is sitting at the Senate. That is what we are looking at in terms of division of revenue. And I want to correct you, Commissioner, because the division of revenue originates at the National Assembly.
That's true.
It only comes to us for concurrence. At the point where we can make any changes, they have already made a decision. And therefore, when we disagree with them, we go to mediation immediately. So therefore, in terms of allocation, if this
But it's a joint decision finally.
They originated
finally it has to be a mediation.
I'd like us to hold that thought for just a moment, because we need to take a commercial break.
No problem.
Mike Mtambo on Twitter says, at the end of the day, we need the Constitution fully implemented, period. So I guess that sort of underscores what Kamodo was saying. We're taking a short break right now. We continue to take a look at your feedback, but when we come back, we'll touch a bit on Kamodo Waiganja's article in the Sunday Standard today, and it talks about the middle class and whether they fully understand the realities of Kenya. Middle class is most of you on social media, so we're coming to that after this break. Alright, and the conversation continues on social media. Stephen Amonja says there's no need for a referendum. The leaders should up their game and stop betraying the Constitution. But a lot of this conversation is happening on social media and indeed within public spaces. Now, Kamodo Waiganja wrote an article about this, his weekly column in the Sunday Standard, and you talked about this conversation being had amongst the middle class predominantly. And to quote you, you said the middle class is many times out of touch with reality in Kenya.
Yes.
Do you believe that amongst the middle class in Kenya that this is a conversation that's being had with the right frame of mind?
Well, maybe that's too general an accusation, but the reality is this. When we were struggling under a very bad constitutional framework, the reality is that the nature, the character of suffering was very different. The middle class was suffering, but there were people who were dying. So in a sense, our understanding of the need for a new constitutional order is very different from a lot of the Kenyan citizenry, which is, and so in a sense, when we see the changes that are there, the impact on them is not as significant as it is to the Atieno and Wanjiko on the ground. So in a sense, even our understanding of the realities of the changes that has happened, we don't really understand it. And because somehow we think that everything revolves around Nairobi, when we see that Nairobi, our streets are not working, our street lights, and we're having jams, we think the entire country is like that, and so therefore we need to go backwards to the good old days when at least the lights were working. The reality is that if you go around this country, people are getting better services, obviously not to the rate that they should be. I have spent a week in West Pokot, in Kapenguria. I have spent a week in Marsabit, in Modogashe, in Isiolo, and I can tell you, people who had never seen a nurse before and a dispensary before are seeing those nurses. For those of us who live here and we think the world revolves around Nairobi, and I think part of it is just being spoiled. I think we've gotten it well for very many years. We have not understood that the rest of Kenya is not like that. And so what frames the discussion about the failure of devolution? Because you see it in social media all the time. It is framed from a middle class perspective. If you ask yourself that despite all the complaints, and that's the point I was making, despite all the complaints that we hear, because you hardly ever hear anything positive about devolution. You hear MCAs are stealing money. Despite that, the devolution is more popular than it was when we were passing the constitution. We passed it at 67%, it is at 80%. Surely Kenyans are not stupid. Kenyans must know there's something happening. It is not everything, but it is definitely better than where it was. What it does, it gives us a challenge for us as leaders. It says that we have something we can grow from. You know what I mean? And so let us not have this apathetic negativity about the constitution and about change because it has not helped us. And in fact, by the way, part of it is that actually the middle class, Yvonne, was doing fairly well within a bad constitutional order. What a good constitutional order, it has also democratized everything, and suddenly we are competing with very many people, and we don't like that. And because we own the public space, it is our voice that is heard. The reality is that that is not necessarily the voice of Kenya. The voice of Kenya is the 78% who say they don't want to hear devolution and the constitution being taken backwards. That is what we need to internalize. And I think the leaders who, because I know like Florence Pence or Hawix in Meru, she will tell you that everything is not perfect, but clearly there has been a change. Let's grow that change instead of just looking back to the days when things were a lot better, because they were not.
Okay, all right. Talking about that conversation that we're having surrounding the Constitution 5 years on, Mutula, where are we with the referendum? Do you think that referendum, that Okoa Kenya referendum, whether you'll come together with the governors in Pesa Mashinani or not, is the silver bullet that will fix the challenges and the loopholes we have with the implementation of the Constitution?
The reality is that the drafters of this Constitution were clever enough to protect the chapter of devolution particularly, that I can zero in on, so that you cannot touch it without going back to the people who elected us. So, for example, the argument about allocation of money to the counties, that argument will not end soon. It will continue as to whether it should be last audited accounts or last collected revenue, because we have created an imbalance. We must agree, because the last audited accounts had 769 million billion, but the national revenue is it's in trillions. So the fact of the matter is that we are dealing with unrealistic figures, and that is the reason that that argument will not cease. But how will you resolve it? Whether the referendum is held now or whether the referendum is held later, whether Parliament agrees in a parliamentary initiative under Article 255 or 256, the fact is that there are certain portions of the Constitution, if you touch, you must go back to the people. And therefore, I want to tell Kenyans that they agreed to this method to protect the Constitution. But if you want the devolution to work in the manner that it is envisaged in other countries like India and Japan, where the levels of devolution are up to 42 to 50% of national revenue collected,
yes, but
we must go back to...
The administration will say that it's actually 45%.
How can it be? It is not. I have the figures. I sit in the finance committee. I can tell you for free, but I won't advise you. I will tell you. It's not. It's hardly 25% if you look at the collected revenue. If you look at 769 billion, which is the audited accounts of 2010, 2011, it's unrealistic. But you cannot touch that portion unless you go to the referendum. You cannot touch the portion where we are having an issue as to whether or not in Kenya Airways, whether it's a national issue or it's a county issue between the National Assembly and the Senate. Somebody says Kenya Airways, listen, Kenya Airways is not a county function. It's like Kenya Airways flying somewhere in the air. What they forget, and sometimes we sit with our legal counterparts and we advise them to tell them, some of their colleagues, that public debt is not a function of the National Assembly alone. It also affects counties.
Right. Senator, though, you haven't answered my question.
What was the question? That whether the referendum is coming?
Yes.
The referendum is
whether
coming.
That is the silver bullet.
It's coming.
Yes.
And let me tell you, because I've told you that there are now 3 initiatives. There's the initiative begun by Senate, there's the initiative of the governors, and there's the initiative of CORD. Inevitably, there will be a referendum. Inevitably.
Do we know when that will be? Because for the Kenyans who support you and who are now saying we need a referendum, are we having it now? Are we having it next year? Are we having it 2017 or after?
Can I have another minute for the process? This document must go to the county assembly.
Yes.
Once it goes to the county assembly and comes back to both the National Assembly and Senate...
Well, you would need to verify your signatures first, though.
They will be verified. They will be
verified. You know, Yvonne, the problem is also a priority. Honestly, right now, is really, and Senator is an extremely sharp lawyer. He would tell you that I don't think a crisis at this point actually requires a referendum. In fact, let me tell you the danger, and we've had this conversation
before. Yes.
The danger of a referendum, the one uniting document in this country, the one document that you go everywhere in this country and there's affirmation, is the Constitution. The minute we have a court-driven initiative and a Jubilee-driven initiative, and one or the other fails, what we will have is that we have now infected the constitution with our partisanship.
Okay.
Now that, if it is necessary, it must be done. But the question for me, is it necessary at this point? And to be honest, I don't think it's a priority. Maybe there'll come a time when we'll need to, but I don't think we're
now.
there. Maybe we're not
Is it a priority now,
question,
Senator? We'll come to Florence in a moment.
I said before, when I started, and I said the elections of 2013, the issues that had been resolved before the elections were 24 months to the election.
Right.
So there's no right time, because if we go into this in 2017, we will lose the public, because they won't know whether Kamotho Waiganjo is speaking from the point of this side of the divide or the other side of the divide. And yet, ideally, whether it's a court-driven, whether it's a Jubilee-driven, and whether it is driven by anybody, the fact of the matter is that if it's 15% increase to 30%, that money will not go to court. That money will go to the public.
Okay.
So
I have to remember I'm dealing with a lawyer who can give a smart answer. Is it a priority now or not?
Thanks for the compliment. It's a priority. It's a priority. It's a priority.
You know,
thank you for the compliment. But the point is that it will be a problem later.
So it's a priority
now.
Okay.
When Kajuju and I can here without quarreling. It's a priority now. I can
okay. Thank you very much. It's a while, but
let me tell you, to be honest, the Okoa Kenya movement has never been a priority. Not to court, not to anyone. What the Okoa Kenya campaign was doing was just to make people relevant politically. If it was a priority, then that ought to have happened a long time ago. When were we told the signatures are there? Up to today, we have not seen them. So it's not an issue of there is Okoa Kenya, there is Pesa Mashinani, there is the Senate initiative. What we are saying is that we don't need that referendum. If there was an agenda by Okoa Kenya, we would have seen it. It's the need for a referendum. And Jubilee had said it will be the first to support a referendum that really brings the issues of the Constitution to light, where we have full stats. But we have not seen it, so let's not even go there. And my learned friend is really trying to avoid that question. So don't make it more painful for him.
I have already answered the question.
We must from Okoa Kenya.
The question. Yes, and I want to
but if you ask her about Okoa Kenya, she's going to be like this. So maybe.
All right, we have to conclude our discussion, and I did promise at the start of this that Kamotho Waiganjo would have the last word.
Yes.
We have, in fact, we've run out of time. So I'd like a minute, please. And I know, I'm dealing with lawyers again, so I plead. A minute on where we go from here and what happens over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Senator, let's start with you.
Devolution is a revolution in Kenya. The counties that are receiving funds, some of them have not seen these funds since independence, and therefore we cannot reverse those gains. I want to plead with my colleagues in the Jubilee administration to think about the reason why we have constitutional officers and a person like Kamotho Waiganjo, a bright lawyer, in a commission that is supposed to implement the constitution, so that it stop interfering with these people in an attempt to try and claw back some of the things that we have gained through the constitution. But lastly, to say that Kenya is at a better place than it was. Kenya is at a better place than it was, and Kenya is not about individuals. Florence Kajuju and myself are not going to be here 30 years or 40 years from now, but Kenya will still continue, and I know that we have greater days ahead.
All right, okay. Positive note. Mheshimiwa?
Let me first of all thank Team Kenya that they have brought back so many medals, and I can say that this is a hotbed of champions. And let me also say that with authority, that the Jubilee administration is extremely committed to ensure that the devolution in particular works, because I come from a county where I've seen the changes that have been brought about by devolution. So we are committed. Another issue is that I can assure the people of Kenya today that the National Assembly is going to ensure that the bills that are pending as we speak now, within the 1 year that we've extended, or even before, are going to be implemented, so that we have legislations in place by 2016, even as we prepare to go into the next elections. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I think, Yvonne, the three things. One is that I think let's take a moment to also appreciate that everybody has done their part. I think people have tried. And by the way, even the executive. I think many of us expected a lot more obstruction than we have seen. And I think if you look at the executive generally, I think it is possible to see that there has been significant energy put in facilitating implementation. But of course there are others who are losing power, and that inevitably they'll try and challenge movement forward. But I think generally we have all done a fairly okay job. We could do a lot better. But there are certain things that remain outstanding. There are critical issues where we need to go back on the drawing board. We need to rethink the leadership and integrity issues. I think if we go to the next election without giving prominence to that issue of should we have some minimums that we are going to require before people can seek elective office. I think that is a conversation we need to have, but it's also a conversation that needs to go to Kenyans, that they also have a responsibility when they're electing to recognize that they're electing people to look after their resources. So it's not just about us stopping people from standing, it is also them electing the right people. The third thing, and I think we need to put our resources in, is civic education. The reality is when you go around the country, people's awareness so that they can participate in civic affairs is pretty limited. The National Assembly did not put sufficient funds in civic education. I think we need to go back on the drawing board. The counties which are required to carry out civic education, I hardly know of a county that has a budget allocation for civic education. We need to do that because again we need to carry Kenyans along. This is not our constitution. This is a constitution for Kenyans, and I think we need to remember that and ensure they have capacity.
All right, very quickly, will you be seeking for an extension of your commission?
No. You know, we have a very bad culture in this country where everybody wants to stay in office forever. We have said as a matter of principle, we shall not seek an extension. It is not our business to decide whether there should be an extension. It is the work of the National Assembly. If the National Assembly makes the decision that it is necessary to have CIC, we will see what to do. But it is not us to say, please let us have more time.
But you need to...
It is irresponsible and it's an insult to Kenyans.
All right, thank you very much. Kamodo Waiganjo, Commissioner with the CIC. Florence Kajuju, thank you, County Member of Parliament in Meru. And we have Senator Mutula Kilonzo Jr. from Makueni. Thank you all for talking about this issue with us. We are going to continue taking a look at your feedback on this issue 5 years on after the promulgation of the Constitution. What are your views? 22155 SMS number, hashtag checkpoint at KTN News, at Yvonne Okwara. Stay with us. We have more when we return. Time for the sports news now. Kenyan star Asbel Kiprop reaffirmed his status as the greatest middle distance runner of the current generation by clinching an exhilarating victory to secure a hat-trick of the world 1500 meters to end Kenya's gold harvest in the IAAF World Championships. Kenya's final medal tally is now 7 gold, 6 silver, 3 bronze as the country won the overall championships ahead of Jamaica. Take a look at Kenya's golden moments. Some wonderful moments there. And in Nairobi, of course, a good shower of rain to just crown the blessings that took place in Beijing, China. So some good news coming out of that there. Okay, let's move on to other stories. Technical University of Kenya, Nairobi are the winners of this year's Super 8 soccer tournament. TUK emerged 4-2 winners over Kiambui in post-match penalties to clinch this year's title at the Nyayo National Stadium. Kiambui took an early lead in the match minutes before Technical University leveled to head into the break on an even scoreline. In the second half, both teams scored a goal each to make matters 2-2, forcing the match to be decided on penalties. Technical University were the better side in the shootout, converting 4 of their kicks as opposed to their opponents who scored only 2.
It has been wonderful. Tumeenjoy sika wachezaji, tumegain a lot from the tournament in terms of equipment, in terms of balls. Tumeenjoy tu sana.
We are hoping that by the end of the tournament we would have identified a few people who will be able to go to bigger teams and possibly even other teams outside the country.
Top 4 Nakuru have cemented their lead in the top of the national 7 series standings after winning their home tournament for the first time, beating Menengai Cream Homeboys 7-5 in a 10th final at the Nakuru Athletic Club. Tournament MVP Jeffrey Omindis scored and converted his own try 3 minutes from halftime to put the Wanyore 7-0 up before Oscar Yodi replied with a try for Homeboys, breaching the Wanyore defense to touchdown. Manchester United suffered their first defeat of the season in the English Premier League.
KTN.
Alright, so we want to wind up our bulletin tonight, and I think there's one good way to wind it up with just one tweet. Eric Nyaga says, "The problem is not the document, it's lack of constitutionalism. People still want to run things casually. So perhaps our attitudes towards the spirit and the letter of the law needs to change." Thank you for watching our bulletin tonight. Much appreciated for all your feedback and indeed for staying with us throughout this bulletin. My name is Yvonne Okwara Matole. I'm wishing you a good night and a good week ahead, but do stay with KTN News. Get the whole story. Good night, Nairobi. Good night, Kenya. Good night, East Africa.